The dough had started to dry at the edges. By the time I realized, my hands were trembling. I'd been shaping tiny hearts from the last batch, dusting them with powdered sugar so fine it looked like morning frost. The kitchen smelled of vanilla and buttersweet, warm, almost holy. My old radio hummed a country tune from the corner, but even that couldn't drown out the sound of my phone buzzing on the counter. It was from Lily, my daughter. I wiped my hands on my apron, the one with faded sunflowers stitched along the hem, and picked up the phone. The screen was bright, her name glowing like a small miracle. For a second, I smiled. Perhaps she was calling to check in, ask about the cookies, or express her gratitude for the help. But when I answered, her voice was careful, too careful. "Hey, Mom," she said. "Listen, about the wedding." My heart slowed. I leaned against the counter. "Yes, honey." There was a pause. Then the words came out sharp and quiet, like something rehearsed. "It's adults only. We just don't have the space for everyone." I didn't say anything at first. The bowl of dough between my elbows seemed to hold its breath. I stared at the tiny hearts, rows and rows of them cooling on the rack, each one brushed with the same care I'd given her birthday cakes when she was 6. "Oh," I said finally, softly. "Of course, I understand." She sounded relieved. That hurt most of all. When the call ended, I stood still for a long while, hands resting on the counter, sugar clinging to my skin. Then I turned off the radio. The silence that followed was heavier than the heat in the oven. It's funny how quiet a house can get once the oven cools down. I used to think silence was peaceful, but now it feels like something alive, like it waits for me to speak first. I live in a small yellow house at the end of Willow Street, the same one my husband, Frank, built with his own hands before Lily was born. The porch sags a little on the right side, and the paint's starting to peel, but I can't bring myself to fix it. Frank always said, if it still stands, let it be. He wasn't one for fancy things, just solid ones, solid and simple. That was him. Every morning, I wake before the sun. Habit, I guess. 40 years of baking will do that to you. I make my coffee, black and strong, and set 2 mugs on the counter without thinking, mine and his. Then I remember, and put one back. Some habits die slower than others. The radio on the shelf still works if you tap it just right. I like to keep it on low. The old country songs, the kind we used to dance to in the kitchen when Lily was little. I can still see her standing on Frank's boots, giggling while he shuffled his feet to keep up with the beat. That's what home used to sound like, laughter and old music, not ticking clocks. These days, the clock is loud enough to fill the room on its own. Lily calls me Mom now. Used to be Mama, then Ma. I guess time trims love down, like that makes it shorter, more efficient. It's not that she's unkind, she's just busy. Everyone's busy now. Her voice on the phone always sounds like she's half running somewhere. Her sentences clipped, her breath thin. Can't talk long, Mom, needing traffic. Kids, she's got 2 little ones, Emma and Sophie. Sweet girls. They used to spend weekends here. The house bursting with noise again. Sophie would draw pictures of the 3 of us in crayon, me, her, and the big cookie jar. "Grams," she'd say, "you make the best sugar cookies in Texas." I'd tell her it wasn't me, it was the recipe. She never believed me, but it's been months since I've heard their voices echo in this kitchen. Lily says, it's too far a drive. 40 minutes doesn't seem far when you're the one waiting. I keep myself busy, though. That's what I tell people when they ask. I bake, I sweep, I hum songs no one remembers. I fold laundry that isn't dirty just to feel useful. Every few days, I walk to the post office and back. It's only 3 blocks. But the air feels different out there, like life hasn't quite forgotten me yet. I'm not one for complaining. Frank used to say, you don't fix loneliness by talking about it. But he was wrong about that. I think talking doesn't fix it, but it gives it somewhere to sit, somewhere other than your chest. When Lily got engaged last year, I cried. I didn't mean to, it just happened. I'd been waiting so long to see her happy again. After her divorce, she was a ghost for months. I'd bring casseroles, call every night, and offer to watch the kids. She always said she was fine, but fine doesn't slam doors and cry in the car. Then came Nathan, a polite man, clean shot with a smooth voice. He worked in real estate, had a smile that could sell the desert a bottle of water. I met him at Christmas. He called me Mrs. Adler even after I told him a dozen times to call me June. He was kind enough, but he looked at me like I was a piece of furniture that came with the house. When they announced the wedding, I offered to bake the cookies for the reception, not the cake. Lily had some bakery picked out for that, but the cookies. The small ones with lemon glaze and heart shapes, just like I made for her school recitals. I thought she'd say no, but she smiled. That polite kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes, and said, "That'd be great, Mom, really helpful." That was all I needed. For the next few months, this kitchen turned into a workshop. Flour everywhere, sugar on the floor, baking sheets stacked to the ceiling. The neighbors started teasing me. "You opening a bakery again, June?" they'd say. I'd just laugh. I hadn't run my bakery since Frank got sick. But it felt good being needed again. Every morning, I'd tie my old apron, turn on the radio, and lose myself in the rhythmics. Roll, cut, bake, cool. The dough stuck under my nails. The sweet smell filled the house. And for a few hours, I wasn't old. I was just me again. Sometimes, I'd hum to the cookies. I know that sounds silly, but I swear the dough listens. Frank used to laugh when he caught me talking to the oven. "You treat those cookies better than you treat me," he'd joke. I'd tell him, "That's because they don't talk back." He'd kiss my cheek anyway. After he passed, baking was the only thing that still made sense. The world had become so loud, so fast, but here in this kitchen, everything followed my pace. The whir of the mixer, the hum of the ovenette was a kind of prayer. The day Lily called about the adults-only rule, I'd just finished my 200th batch. The kitchen smelled like heaven and heartache. I remember the exact time because the sunlight had just started moving across the counter, catching on the sugar dust. That's when the phone rang. You already know what she said. But what I didn't tell her, what I couldn't, was how much of me was wrapped up in those cookies. Each one had her initials piped in delicate white frosting, L and N. I'd spent hours getting the curls right. Even with my stiff hands, I wanted them to be perfect. I wanted her day to be perfect. After the call, I didn't cry. I just stood there, apron still tied, fingers sticky with icing. The words "adults only" bounced around in my head like something foreign. I looked around at the kitchen, the trays of cookies lined up like little soldiers, waiting to be loved on. I felt this sharp ache in my chest. Not anger, just emptiness. I turned off the oven, even though there were still cookies waiting to go in. I couldn't stand the smell anymore. I sat down at the table and stared at the clock. It ticked too loudly, like it knew something I didn't. I thought about calling her back, asking if it was really space or if it was something else. Maybe Nathan didn't want me there. Maybe I was too old, too small town for their big city wedding. But then I remembered her tone, the relief in her voice when I said, "Of course," relief that hurt worse than anything she could have said. So, I didn't call. Instead, I cleaned up. I packed the cookies into tins, layer after layer, separating them with wax paper. My hands moved on their own. Maybe I was afraid to stop. Stopping would mean feeling it. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt too big. The air is too still. I sat by the window with a cup of tea that went cold before I touched it. Outside, the streetlight buzzed, moths circling it like prayers that never landed. I kept thinking about the last time Lily and I baked together. She must have been 12. We made oatmeal cookies for a church fundraiser. She'd gotten flour on her nose and laughed so hard she almost dropped the tray. I remember looking at her then and thinking, she's going to be fine. And she is fine. Successful, married, busy. Too busy for her mother, maybe, but fine, still. I can't help but wonder when fine started, meaning far away. The next morning, I woke early. Like always, the dough I'd left covered on the counter had hardened overnight. I thought about throwing it out, but waste never sat right with me. So, I kneaded it back to life, rolling it out one last time. The radio played quietly, a gospel song I hadn't heard in years. Halfway through cutting the dough, I stopped and looked at the clock. Then, at the tin of cookies on the shelf. That's when the idea came to me, quiet, gentle, like someone whispering in my ear. There's a children's home 2 streets over St. Mary's. I used to donate pies there during the holidays. Maybe they'd like some cookies. I didn't plan it, didn't think it through. I just started packing the boxes into the back seat of my car. It was barely 9 in the morning when I drove off, the sun rising over the Texas horizon, painting everything gold. The streets were quiet. The air smelled like dew and jasmine. I rolled the window down, letting the breeze touch my face. When I pulled up to the orphanage, a young woman came out to meet me. She couldn't have been more than 25, with freckles across her nose, hair tied in a messy bun. "Morning, ma'am," she said, smiling. "Can I help you?" You brought something," I said. My voice cracked on the last word. I opened the trunk, and she gasped when she saw the boxers. All those for us? Yes, I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. I baked them for my daughter's wedding, but she doesn't need them now. She didn't ask questions, just smiled, real and wide, and called for help. Soon, a few children came running barefoot, laughing, eyes wide with curiosity. They carried the boxers inside, one by one, like treasures. When they opened the first tin, the smell of butter and sugar filled the air. The little ones clapped. Cookies, one boy shouted. I laughed a sound I hadn't heard from myself in months. The young woman asked for my name so they could thank me properly. I just said, June, and waved her off. As I drove home, something inside me felt lighter, not fixed, but lighter, like maybe kindness was its own kind of company. Still, when I got home and hung my apron on the hook, the silence met me again, softer this time, but still there. I sat at the table, poured myself a cup of tea, and looked at the empty tins stacked by the door. That's when I realized Dia hadn't been baking for her wedding. I'd been baking for a place at her table, and when that place was taken away, I had to find another table to set my love on. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight pressing through the curtains like it had been waiting for me. The house smelled faintly of sugar and lemon, though I'd washed every bowl and wiped every counter. I guess sweetness hangs on longer than hurt. I made my coffee and sat at the table, listening to the world outside come alive, birds arguing in the oak tree, a garbage truck moaning down the street. My apron still hung on the hook by the door. For the first time in months, it looked out of place, like a flag left flying after the battle's done. I thought I'd feel empty after giving the cookies away, but what I felt was stillness, the kind you get right after a storm when you're not sure whether to breathe or cry. I kept picturing those kids' faces, the way they clapped when the tins opened, the little boy with chocolate on his chin. I hadn't felt seen like that in a long time. Still, habit is a stubborn thing. By noon, I found myself rearranging flour jars, checking the oven temperature for no reason. I even lined up the cookie cutters, then laughed at myself. You can rest, June, I said out loud. You've earned it. The phone rang around 2. My heart jumped before I even looked at the screen. For one foolish second, I thought maybe it was Lily. Maybe she'd changed her mind. Decided her mama deserved a seat after all. But the caller ID said, unknown. Hello, a bright young voice answered. Hi, is this June Adler? Yeah, this is Maria Lopez, from the Dallas Daily Sun. I blinked. The newspaper. Yes, ma'am. I hope I'm not bothering you. I just got off the phone with the director at St. Mary's Children's Home. She told me about a woman who donated dozens of handmade wedding cookies yesterday. The kids called them angel cookies. I wanted to see if I could speak to the baker. I laughed before I could stop myself. Lord, they're exaggerating. They were just cookies. Maria chuckled. They said they were the best they'd ever had, and that you stayed to watch them taste the first batch. I rubbed my wrist, feeling shy all of a sudden. Well, I didn't stay long. I didn't want to be in the way. Would you mind if I wrote a small piece about it? Just a human interest column. People could use something kind this week. Kind. What a simple word, and how far away it had felt lately. You can, I said, but don't use my last name, please. Just June from Willow Street. That'll do fine. She promised she would and thanked me 3 times before hanging up. I stared at the phone a while after, then set it face down on the table. It wasn't about the newspaper. It was about being asked. Someone wanted to hear from me, not for what I could give, but for what I'd already given. That night, I dreamed of flour falling like snow. Frank was in the dream, sitting at the old kitchen table, smiling with that crooked grin of his. You did good, Uni, he said. You remembered who you are. When I woke, my pillow was damped. 2 days later, the article came out. I didn't even know until Mrs. Carver next door knocked on my door, holding the paper. You old celebrity. She laughed, waving it like a flag. Look at you on page 3. There it was, a small photo the orphanage had taken. Me standing in the parking lot beside the kids, holding one of the tins. My hair was messy, my smile small, but my eyes looked alive. The headline read, Local baker turns heartbreak into hope. Cookies of kindness delight St. Mary's children. I read it twice, then again. The phone rang all afternoon after that. Old customers from my bakery called to say they'd seen it. A teacher from the children's home called, saying the kids wanted to make thank you cards. Even the pastor from the church left a message. Each word settled somewhere deep, like warm bread in an empty stomach. That evening, I sat on the porch with my cup of tea and watched the sun bleed orange over the roofs. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. I felt steady, Then my phone buzzed. Lily. For a second, I thought about letting it ring out, pretending I hadn't seen it, but that's not who I am. I swiped the screen. "Hi, Mom," she said, voice careful again. "Hello, darlin'. So, I saw something online. Someone posted that story about you. It's all over Facebook, is it?" I said softly. "Yeah. Aunt Mary tagged me, said, your mama's famous." She forced a laugh. "Guess you've been busy." "Just doing what I know how to do." Silence. Then, "Mom, why didn't you tell me about the cookies? I mean, we could have used them for the rehearsal dinner, or something." I smiled to myself. "I didn't think you'd want them." Her breath caught. "That's not we. Nathan thought it'd be complicated with the caterer. And it's all right, Lily." "No, Mom. Listen, but I didn't want to. Not tonight." For once, I didn't want to chase her words or try to make her comfortable. I wanted peace. "I'm glad you called," I said gently. "I really am. And I hope your wedding's everything you dreamed of." She went quiet for a beat. Then, I'll call you later, okay?" "All right, sweetheart." When the call ended, I set the phone down and listened to the crickets. My heart was steady. I realized something right then. The ache I'd been carrying all this time wasn't from being left out. It was from forgetting that I could stand on my own. That night, I lit a candle beside Frank's photo. "You see, darlin'," I whispered, "turns out, love can find new doors when the old ones close." Outside, the wind rattled the chimes, soft and low, like he was answering me. The next morning, I found 3 envelopes in my mailbox. One was from the electric company, one was junk mail, and the third stopped me cold. Thick paper, careful handwriting, a child's scrawl across the back that said, "To Miss June." I carried it inside like something fragile. Inside were a dozen thank you notes from the kids at St. Mary's. Crayon hearts, stick figures holding cookies, words misspelled but honest. "Thank you for making us happy. I love the lemon ones. You're the best baker ever." One note was different. It had no name, just a drawing, a little house with smoke curling from the chimney, and the words, "Looks warm." I pressed that one to my chest. I spent the whole morning reading them, over and over. The kettle whistled itself dry twice before I remembered to pour the tea. Outside, the world kept moving, cars passing, dogs barking. But in here, everything slowed to the rhythm of my heartbeat. By afternoon, my phone started buzzing again. Messages from old neighbors, a lady from church, even someone from a TV station wanting a quick interview. I said no, thank you. The story wasn't about me. It was about the cookies, the kids, the kindness that still had a place in the world. Still, I won't lie, it felt good to be noticed, to be more than a name on a family group chat or a last-minute babysitter. Around 6, there was a knock on the door. I almost didn't answer, but when I peeked through the curtain, I saw my granddaughter Sophie standing on the porch, her hair wind-tangled, holding a grocery bag. She said when I opened the door, "I brought you something." Inside the bag was a carton of milk, a loaf of bread, and a jar of honey. "Your mama sends you?" I asked softly. She shook her head. "I saw the story on TikTok. Someone posted it with music and everything. You're viral, Grams." "Viral," I repeated, laughing. "Lord, I hope that's good." "It is. Everyone's talking about how kind you are." "Mom's, well, she's kind of embarrassed." Sophie winced. She said people keep messaging her, asking why you weren't invited. I felt my chest tighten, but kept my smile. "Ah, the internet loves drama." Sophie hesitated, studying me the way her mother used to when she was small, cautious, curious. "Are you mad at her?" I poured her some lemonade. "No, sweetheart. I was hurt, but not mad. Sometimes people forget where they came from when they're trying too hard to get where they're going." She nodded slowly, like she understood more than she should at 15. "Mom says Nathan doesn't like being talked about. He thinks this makes the family look bad." While I said, setting the glass down, "Sometimes the truth doesn't look bad, it just looks real." She grinned, proud of me in that shy teenage way. "You always say the best stuff." We spent the next hour talking about school, her friends, and the prom she didn't want to attend. When she left, she hugged me tighter than usual. "I wish you were coming to the wedding," she whispered. "Me too," I said, "but it's okay. I'll be there in spirit, probably making sure the cake doesn't burn." She laughed and drove away, leaving the scent of her strawberry shampoo hanging in the doorway. After she left, I sat in the quiet again, but this time, it didn't feel lonely. It felt earned, like peace after a long storm. That night, as I put away the dishes, I remembered another kitchen, a smaller one, Years ago, when Lily was barely 8, money had been tight that year. Frank had lost work after his back gave out, and the bakery bills were piling high. Lily came home crying one afternoon because all the girls at school had new Easter dresses, and she didn't. I stayed up that night sewing her one from an old curtain. It wasn't perfect, but it had a bow in the back and white lace on the sleeves. When she wore it to church, she spun in front of the mirror and said, "Mama, I look like a princess." She didn't see me wipe my eyes. I remember Frank whispering that night, "You're keeping this family together with thread and sugar." I guess I still am. The days that followed were strange, busy, almost too bright. People kept sending letters, flowers, and small gifts. A group of students from the local college dropped by, asking if they could film me baking for a kindness project. I said no, but gave them cookies anyway. Then, one afternoon, while watering the roses, I heard the gate creak open. Mom, it was Lily, standing there in her work clothes, hair pulled back, eyes tired. For a moment, I didn't move. I just took her in. She looked so much like the girl who used to dance barefoot in the kitchen. "I didn't think you'd answer," she said. "I almost didn't," I said truthfully. She laughed softly, like she didn't know whether to cry or apologize. I read the full article. "You didn't tell them anything bad. You didn't even mention me. Was I supposed to?" She looked down. "No, I guess I thought you'd be angry." I stepped closer, wiping my hands on my apron. "You're my daughter, Lily. I've been angry for you, never at you, but I am learning to stop hurting myself for other people's comfort." Her lips trembled. "I didn't mean to, I know," I interrupted softly. "You just didn't think it would matter." Tears filled her eyes, and for the first time in years, she didn't hide them. "Mom, everyone at work keeps asking about you. They say your story made them call their own mothers. I feel so small." I smiled faintly. "Small isn't bad, honey. It's where you start again." She took a shaky breath. "Nathan says we should invite you to the wedding. But it's next week. And after all this, it might feel awkward." I held her gaze. "If you're inviting me out of guilt, don't. I don't want a seat someone had to clear out of obligation." Her shoulders fell. "Then, what do you want?" "I want you to be kind, not just to me, but to yourself. And I want my granddaughter to grow up knowing that saying no doesn't make her cruel." We stood there a long moment, the smell of roses thick between us. Then she said, "You've always been stronger than me." "No," I said. "I just had more practice." She smiled then, a small, real thing, and reached out to squeeze my hand. "Thank you for baking those cookies, Mom," she whispered. "For you," I said. Always. When she left, I felt the ache again, but it was gentler now, like pressing on a bruise that's finally healing. That night, the sunset poured through my kitchen window, and the house glowed gold. I took out my old recipe book and wrote on the last page, "Kindness is the only recipe that never goes stale." Then, I closed it and smiled. The following week drifted by like a slow song you don't want to end. The air turned heavy with Texas heat, and every evening the cicadas sang loud enough to drown out thought. I spent most of my time on the porch, a glass of sweet tea sweating beside me, reading the children's letters again. I told myself I was ready to move on, that Lily's visit had closed something inside me, stitched a seam that had been fraying for years. But some nights, when the house went quiet, I still caught myself listening for her voice, the way she used to call, "Mama, taste this. It's too salty." Those echoes don't leave. They just find new rooms to live in. On Thursday morning, the mailman honked twice. "You got a package, Miss June," he shouted. I waved him up the walk, and he handed me a cardboard box sealed in bright blue tape. Inside were dozens of drawings, cookies with wings, smiling suns, stick figure bakers, and a note from the St. Mary's director. "Dear June, your kindness inspired a community bake sale. The kids wanted you to know they raised $2,300 for new books. They've been calling it the Angel Cookie Fund. We'd love for you to visit anytime." I sat right there on the floor, surrounded by paper angels, and cried the kind of tears that don't sting, they cleanse. Later that day, my neighbor Mrs. Carver stopped by with her knitting bag. "They're talking about you on Channel 8, honey. You're there. Good news story of the week." Imagine that. I laughed so hard my cheeks hurt. "Good news about me." She patted my hand. "It's about time the world noticed good people for a change." That evening, I turned on the TV, and there it was. Grainy footage of me handing cookies to children, soft music playing underneath. The reporter's voice said, "In a world where headlines often divide, One grandmother in Willow Street reminds us that kindness still connects. My eyes blurred before they even finished the sentence. I wasn't used to being the headline. Around 9 p.m., the phone rang again. This time it wasn't Lily, it was Nathan. His voice was polite, but tight. The way people sound when they're not sure if they're apologizing or defending themselves. Mrs. Adler, he began, I wanted to thank you for the cookies. Made quite an impression. I leaned back in my chair. Good or bad? He cleared his throat. Both, maybe. People keep asking why you weren't invited. It's made things complicated, I repeated. That's one word for it. He sighed. Lily feels awful. She's under a lot of pressure. I just wanted you to know we never meant to hurt you. Intent and impact aren't the same thing, Nathan, I said gently, but I appreciate you calling. He hesitated. The wedding's Saturday. You'd be welcome if you'd like to come. There, it was the invitation I'd wanted for months, finally landing when I no longer needed it. Thank you, I said. Truly, but I've already got plans. He sounded surprised. Plans? Yes, I promised some children I'd bring them more cookies. He didn't know what to say to that. We exchanged a few polite words and hung up. When the line went quiet, I exhaled a long, slow breath that felt like letting go of years of trying. Friday morning, I packed my old sedan with tins, again fewer this time, but enough. Lemon hearts, cinnamon stars, chocolate buttons. The drive to St. Mary's felt lighter, freer. I rolled down the window, and the wind carried the smell of sugar and sun-baked asphalt. When I arrived, the children came running. The youngest girl, Ruby, wrapped her arms around my waist and said, "You came back." Of course I did. I said, I promised. Didn't I? They led me inside to a classroom they'd decorated with paper hearts. The director smiled. They've been waiting all morning. Would you like to say something? I shook my head. No speeches. Let's just eat. The room was filled with laughter, crumbs, and sticky fingers. I watched them bite into each cookie like it was Christmas morning. Every giggle, every thank you, felt like a little prayer answered. Afterward, one of the older boys asked if I'd show them how to bake sometime. I promised I would. Maybe next week. Maybe every week if my knees behaved. As I drove home, I caught sight of my reflection in the rearview mirror. Wrinkled, yes, but alive. Eyes bright, like they hadn't been in years. For the first time since Frank passed, I felt like I was living forward instead of backward. That night, I sat on the porch watching the sky turn that soft Texas lavender. The phone buzzed again. Lily this time. A short text. We're getting married tomorrow. I saw the TV piece. You looked beautiful. I'm sorry for everything. I stared at the screen for a long while before typing back. Be happy, sweetheart. That's all I ever wanted. I hit send, then set the phone down and watched the stars appear. One by one. The next day their wedding day. I woke early anyway. Old habits again. I baked one last batch of cookies, not for anyone else, but for me. The smell filled the house like memory and mercy. When they were done, I carried a plate outside, sat on the porch steps, and let the morning sun warm my face. Somewhere across town, music would be playing, vows being spoken. I wished them well, sincerely. But my heart was here, where peace tasted like lemon and sugar. As I sipped my coffee, I whispered to Frank, guess what, love? The world finally knows our little secret kindness can survive anything. The wind rustled through the roses, and for a moment, I swear I heard him chuckle. The morning after Lily's wedding, the sky was gray, one of those soft Texas Sundays where even the birds seemed to take a rest. I brewed a pot of coffee, added a dash of cinnamon like Frank used to, and sat at the kitchen table. The quiet didn't ache anymore. It just existed, like a gentle companion. I thought about calling Lily, asking how it went, but decided against it. She needed her moment. I'd had mine. Around 10, there was another knock on the door. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened it, expecting Mrs. Carver. But it was a young woman I'd never seen before, holding a small box tied with a white ribbon. Miss June, she asked, smiling nervously. I'm from St. Mary's. The kids wanted me to bring you this. I stepped aside to let her in. Well, isn't that the sweetest thing? What's all this? She set the box on the table and slid it toward me. They said you gave them something special, and they wanted to give you something back. Inside were hand-painted cookies, crooked and uneven, but full of love. Little hearts, sons, and one that said thank you. Grandma June. My eyes blurred. I traced the wobbly frosting letters with my fingertip, my throat tight. They made these, she nodded. Every single one. I smiled. The kind that starts in your chest and spills upward. Would you like some tea? We sat together for half an hour, talking about the children, about the bake sale, about life. She told me they'd used part of the money to buy new library books, and they were naming the new corner shelf after me. The June Adler, reading Nook. I laughed through tears. I never thought my name would end up in a library instead of a bakery. When she left, I carried the cookie with "Thank you, Grandma June" into the living room and placed it beside Frank's photo. He would have loved that. Later that afternoon, I went for a walk down Willow Street. The neighborhood had begun to change. New families, new cars, but the same hum of lawn mowers and barbecue smoke. As I passed by the community park, I saw something that stopped me. A chalkboard sign that read, "Community Bake-Off for St. Mary's, inspired by the Cookie Lady." I stood there, blinking, as two little girls ran past with cupcake trays. A woman I didn't recognize waved from behind a folding table. "Miss June, you came." I almost laughed. I didn't know I was invited. "You started this whole thing," she said, handing me a flyer. "People wanted to do something kind, said your story reminded them what matters." Dozens of families filled the park, their tables covered in pastries, pies, and cookies. Music played from a small speaker, and laughter rippled through the air. Someone had even made a sign with big red letters, "Kindness is the secret ingredient." I walked between the tables, tasting cookies I didn't bake, meeting people I'd never known. Each one had a story. A young mother told me her son started baking to calm his anxiety. A retired man said he'd joined a church kitchen because of that article. Every word felt like a thread, weaving a tapestry out of what I thought was just a single act. When the sun started setting, the organizer came up to the small microphone and said, "Before we close, we'd like to thank the woman who started it all, Miss June from Willow Street." Everyone turned toward me, clapping. My face flushed warm, and for a second, I wanted to hide. But then I felt something deep in my bones, the same steadiness I felt when I used to hold Lily as a baby, or when Frank would squeeze my hand without saying a word. I stepped forward, not because I wanted to be seen, but because I finally knew I deserved to be. The woman handed me the mic, and my voice came out small but sure. "I'm no saint," I said. "I just did what felt right. Life's been hard and kind to me in equal measure, and I've learned that when love has nowhere to go, you can always give it to someone who needs it." That's all I did. I baked my love into something sweet. The crowd went quiet for a heartbeat, and then applause filled the air. Some people cried, some smiled. I just stood there, feeling the wind on my face and the weight in my chest finally lift. After the event, as I was leaving, a woman stopped me. "Your daughter must be so proud of you." I smiled softly. "She will be, someday." When I got home, the house felt different. Not emptier, not fuller, just alive. I opened the windows to let in the evening air, then sat by the phone and stared at it. Part of me still hoped Lily would call, but even if she didn't, I knew I'd be fine. Just as I was turning off the lamp, the screen lit up. It was a photo message from Sophie, a picture of her and Lily, both dressed in their wedding clothes, standing under a string of lights. Beneath it, Sophie had typed, "We missed you. Gram's mom cried when they played You Are My Sunshine. She said it was your song with Grandpa." I felt something deep inside shift. That same warmth that used to fill me when Lily was little. I typed back, "It still is, sweetheart. Tell your mama I sang along from here." Then, I set the phone down, leaned back in my chair, and listened to the night settle around me. The crickets sang like a lullaby. The world, for once, felt in tune. The week after the bake-off, the world around me began to slow again, the way it does after excitement fades. The stories stopped trending, the phone stopped ringing, and the mail dwindled down to its usual stack of bills and grocery flyers. But something inside me had changed for good. I still woke early every morning, still brewed my coffee black and strong, still turned on the little radio by the window. But the silence that used to feel heavy now felt sacred, like a friend who didn't need to fill every space with chatter. I'd sit there, watching the sunlight creep across the kitchen floor, and think about all the people who had reached out, the children, the neighbors, strangers who said the story made them call their mothers. And for the first time, I realized, maybe love doesn't disappear when people forget you. Maybe it just travels, changing hands until it finds its way back in another form. One quiet afternoon, about 2 weeks after the wedding, a small envelope arrived in the mail. No return address, just my name written in a familiar slant, Lily's handwriting. My fingers hesitated before tearing it open. Inside was a short note. Mom, I don't know how to start this. The wedding was beautiful, but it didn't feel complete. Nathan said the vows perfectly. The food was great. Everyone smiled. And yet, something was missing. You. When the band played You Are My Sunshine, I couldn't even look at Sophie because she started crying. She said it was your song. And she was right. It always was. I've spent the last few days replaying everything. The things I said, the things I didn't. I thought I was setting boundaries. But what I really did was build a wall around my own heart. I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope you'll let me try again. Love, Lily. I sat there with that letter in my lap for a long while. The words weren't perfect, but they were hers. For years, I'd prayed for something like this. Not an apology, but understanding. And here it was, small and fragile as a sparrow landing in my hand. Asterisk. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it between the pages of my recipe book. Next to the note, Frank had written me on our 25th anniversary, "You make life taste sweet." That evening, I baked again, not out of sadness, but out of joy that didn't know where else to go. I made oatmeal raisin, Lily's favorite when she was a girl. As the smell filled the kitchen, I caught myself humming the same old tune. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. Halfway through the second tray, the phone rang. I wiped my hands and answered. Mom. Her voice was soft, uncertain. Hi, sweetheart, I said, pretending my heart wasn't beating fast. Did you get my letter? I did. Silence. Then, did you read it? I did. Another pause. I meant every word. I know you did. I've been thinking, she went on. Next weekend's Sophie's birthday. We were planning a small dinner at the house, just family. I'd like you to come, if you want to. I smiled to myself. Only if you promise not to change the locks again. She let out a shaky laugh, and that sound, that laugh, carried me straight back to her childhood. 2 nights of burnt pancakes and pillow forts and everything before distance existed. I promise, she said. I'll even make the key myself. We talked a little longer. Nothing heavy, nothing forced. Just about the weather, the kids, and her new garden. When we hung up, I stood at the window and watched the sun dip behind the oak trees. I didn't cry this time. I just breathed. The following Saturday, I put on my blue floral dress, the one Frank always said brought out my eyes, and baked a small batch of sugar cookies shaped like hearts. Nothing fancy, just simple, honest sweetness. As I drove down the familiar road toward Lily's house, my hands trembled slightly on the wheel. The last time I'd come this way, I'd found a locked door and silence behind the curtains. Now, the same house stood bathed in golden evening light, laughter spilling through an open window. When I parked, Sophie came running down the driveway barefoot, her dress flaring like a little flag. Grams, you came, she cried, wrapping her arms around me. I could feel her heart thudding against mine. Inside, the house smelled of roasted chicken and lemon candles. Lily stood by the table, hands twisting nervously in her apron. When she saw me, she froze. Then she walked forward slowly and whispered, "Hi, Mom. Hi, sweetheart." For a heartbeat, we just stood there. Then she stepped closer and hugged me. It wasn't the light, polite kind of hug people give out of habit. It was real, full and trembling and wordless. "I missed you," she said against my shoulder. "I know," I whispered. "I missed you, too." Dinner was simple but full of laughter. Nathan carved the chicken while Sophie told stories about school. At one point, I noticed Lily watching me from across the table, not with guilt, but with tenderness, the kind that takes root only after understanding pain. After dessert, Sophie brought out her phone. "Grams, can I show you something?" On the screen was a video clip from the bake-off. The kids at St. Mary's laughing, people holding signs that said "Kindness lives here." It had over 2 million views. "Everyone keeps commenting about you," Sophie said proudly. "They say you remind them of their grandmas, that you made them call home." I smiled through tears. That's the best thing anyone could ever say. Lily reached across the table and took my hand. "You didn't just make cookies, Mom. You made people remember what love looks like when it's quiet." For once, I didn't try to brush it off with humor. I just let it sink in. Later that night, as the sky deepened to indigo, Lily walked me out to the porch. The air smelled of rain and honeysuckle. "Do you think you can forgive me?" she asked softly. I thought about it. Really thought. Then I said, Forgiveness isn't a switch, Lily. It's a slow thaw. But tonight, it feels warm enough to start melting. She smiled through tears. I'll take that. We stood there together for a long while, listening to the crickets and the hum of the world. And in that stillness, I realized something. I hadn't just been waiting for her to love me again. I'd been waiting for me to love myself again. When I drove home, the roads were slick from a light rain. Streetlights reflected in small golden puddles, and everything smelled clean, renewed. As I pulled into my driveway, I looked at my little yellow house, the porch, sagging, the flowers blooming wild, and I felt something deep and solid settle inside me. This house, this life, these small acts of care, they were enough, more than enough. I went inside, poured myself a cup of tea, and turned on the radio. The same old country song came on, the one Frank and I used to dance to. Without thinking, I took his photo from the shelf, held it close, and began to sway slowly, bare feet on the cool tile floor. You'd be proud of her, I whispered, and maybe a little proud of me, too. Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere far away, the kind that promises rain but not ruin. I set the photo back, blew out the candle, and let the quiet fold around me like a blanket. That night, before bed, I wrote one last line in my recipe book beneath the others. Love doesn't always come back the way it left, but it always finds its way home. Then, I closed the book, turned off the lamp, and let the soft hum of the rain carry me into sleep. It's strange how quickly life can settle into a new rhythm once you stop waiting for it to go back to what it was. The days after that, dinner passed in a kind of golden calm, not perfect, just gentler. The phone didn't ring constantly, the headlines moved on, and my house returned to its old sounds, the creak of the floor, the sigh of the kettle, the hum of the refrigerator at night. I kept a little cookie that said thank you, Grandma June, wrapped in wax paper on the counter. I couldn't bring myself to eat it. It wasn't food anymore. It was proof that something good had come out of heartbreak. Lily called once a week after that, sometimes twice. The first few calls were awkward, like two people learning a language they used to speak fluently, but every conversation got a little easier. She started telling me about her work again, her garden, the new puppy they'd adopted. Sometimes she'd pause mid-sentence and say, "You still there, Mom?" And I'd smile and answer, "Always." The best calls, though, were the ones where Sophie joined in. She'd chatter about school projects and teenage drama, and every time I heard her laugh, I thanked the Lord that at least one thing had never changed: the sound of love, when it's young and unguarded. One Saturday morning, a few months later, there was another knock at my door. When I opened it, Sophie was standing there holding a grocery bag, grinning ear to ear. "I come bearing ingredients," she said dramatically. "We're baking today." I laughed. "We are we? Who gave you permission to raid my kitchen?" "Mom did," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an answer. "She said you'd pretend to fuss, but that you'd be happy I came." She wasn't wrong. We spent the whole afternoon baking flour on our noses, music on the radio, the windows open wide to let in the summer air. Sophie wasn't much for following recipes. "Measurements are just suggestions," she said, tossing handfuls of chocolate chips into the bowl. When I told her she baked like her mother, she wrinkled her nose. "Then maybe I got it from you." At one point, she grew quiet, watching the cookies rise through the oven glass. "Grams," she said softly. "Mom told me everything, about the wedding, about the locks, all of it." She cried when she did. I didn't answer right away. I just brushed a streak of flour off her cheek. "People do foolish things when they're scared," I said. "It doesn't mean they stop loving you." She said you forgave her. I did. I smiled. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting, honey. It's remembering without the pain." Sophie nodded slowly, as if tucking the words away somewhere deep. When the cookies were done, we sat at the table with glasses of milk, the smell of sugar filling the house. She pulled out her phone and showed me another post, this time a short video she'd made herself. Clips of us baking, the cookies cooling on the rack, my hands sprinkling sugar. The caption read, "Kindness doesn't age." I didn't know what to say. My throat felt full. "It's for you," she said. "You're everyone's favorite story now." People comment things like, "I wish she were my grandma." I chuckled softly. "Well, tell them I'm too busy for more grandkids." She laughed, then reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm glad you're ours." That moment, that simple squeeze, said everything words couldn't. After she left, I cleaned the kitchen like always, but this time, I didn't mind the crumbs or the dishes. The mess meant life was still happening here. Asterisk that evening, I sat on the porch as the sky turned honey. A warm wind rustled the roses, and the chimes swayed softly. I thought of Frank, of the bakery we built from nothing, of the laughter that once filled this house and the silence that had followed. And I thought of how that silence had finally changed its tune, from loneliness to peace. When the first stars came out, I went inside and took down my old recipe book. It was thick with years, coffee stains, penciled notes, smudges of butter. On the very last page, beneath my newest line about love finding its way home, I started writing something new, for Sophie. May you always bake your heart into what you do, and may kindness always be your secret ingredient. I left the book open to let the ink dry, and smiled. Asterisk. A few days later, Lily came by with a basket of fresh peaches from her garden. She looked different, lighter somehow, like she'd finally stopped holding her breath. Thought, maybe you could teach me that pie recipe again, she said shyly. I thought you were too busy for old tricks, I teased. She shook her head. Not for this. So we baked, side by side, like old times. The air between us felt easy again, filled with small talk and laughter. When the pie came out of the oven, golden and perfect, she hugged me from behind and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I turned and held her face in my flour-dusted hands. Mothers don't give up, honey. We just wait for the right season to start again. That night, after she left, I sat with a slice of pie and thought about how life had come full circle, from a locked door to an open kitchen, from heartbreak to hope, from cookies to community, that it wasn't loud or grand. It was gentle, ordinary, sacred, the kind of miracle you almost miss if you blink. Weeks turned into months, summer faded into fall, and the world kept turning its quiet wheel. I still baked for the orphanage now and then, sometimes with Sophie, sometimes alone. They'd send photos of the children reading in the June Adler nook, cookies in hand, smiles wide. I kept those pictures pinned to the fridge, right beside Lily's first-grade drawing of a heart that said, "I love you, Mama." One Sunday, as I was sweeping the porch, a mail truck pulled up. The driver handed me a large envelope. Inside was a letter from the city council. They were naming the annual community bake-off after me, the June Adler Kindness Fair. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the broom. Frank would have loved the irony. I'd spent my life baking for everyone else, and now my name would be on the banner. Not for fame, but for sweetness. That evening, I wrote to the orphanage, telling them I'd bring cookies for the opening day next spring. I ended the letter the way I end all my notes now, with love and a pinch of sugar. June. Later, as dusk settled and the house filled with that soft amber light I love so much, I brewed a pot of tea and sat by the window. The radio played faintly, the same tune as always. "You are my sunshine," I sang along quietly, voice trembling but steady. I thought of Lily, of Sophie, of those children, of every person who had found a bit of warmth in my story, and I realized that maybe that was what grace really was, not being loved perfectly, but loving anyway, and letting that love ripple outward. The tea cooled in my cup. The world outside glowed gold, then blue, then dark. I felt no loneliness, no waiting, no ache, just the steady heartbeat of a life well lived, and the quiet sweetness of peace. Before turning in, I stepped outside one last time. The air was cool, and the stars looked close enough to touch. Somewhere in the distance, a train hummed the same sound I'd fallen asleep to for decades. I closed my eyes and whispered into the night, "Thank you, for the pain that taught me boundaries, for the silence that taught me strength, for the love that found its way back home." Then I went inside, turned off the light, and let the stillness fill the room like sugar melting into tea, slow, warm, and complete. Asterisk.